Maybe this will finally teach you to mind your own business and stop questioning our decisions. My daughter-in-law Melissa spat before yanking the front door shut and clicking the deadbolt, leaving me standing barefoot on their icy concrete porch in my pajamas at 1:30 in the morning while the January wind whipped through downtown Portland. What she didn't realize was that by 8:00 a.m. that same morning, she'd be desperately speed dialing every financial institution in Oregon, her voice shaking with panic as she tried to understand why every single account, credit line and automatic payment she thought belonged to the family had vanished without a trace. With just one phone call I made from my heated car. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Before we dive into this incredible story of family betrayal, financial manipulation, and the sweet taste of justice served ice cold, make sure you absolutely smash that like button. Trust me, you're going to want to share this one with everyone you know. Drop a comment telling me what state you're watching from, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because stories like this one will make you question everything you thought you knew about family loyalty and financial boundaries. You're about to witness what happens when someone pushes the wrong 68-year-old woman too far, especially when that woman happens to control more wealth than her ungrateful family ever imagined possible. My name is Victoria Sterling. I'm 68 years old, and this story begins 3 years ago when I made what I believed was a loving decision to help my struggling son Derek and his growing family navigate some temporary financial challenges. A decision that would teach me the most painful lesson of my life about the razor-thin difference between being genuinely generous and being a complete fool who enables the worst kind of entitled behavior. But to understand how I ended up locked outside my own son's house on one of the coldest nights in Portland's history, before becoming the most financially dangerous person my family had ever underestimated, you need to know exactly who I was before I allowed my maternal instincts to completely override 4 decades of sharp business judgment and street-smart financial planning. For 42 years, I was Victoria Sterling, founder and CEO of Sterling Digital Solutions, one of the most innovative and profitable technology consulting firms in the Pacific Northwest. I didn't just advise businesses on digital transformation, I revolutionized how entire industries approach technology integration and data management. My company specialized in helping traditional businesses modernize their operations, and I had built a client roster that included everything from family-owned manufacturing companies to major hospital systems to government agencies that trusted the Sterling name for mission-critical projects. I started with absolutely nothing except a computer science degree from Portland State University and a $5,000 loan from my credit union. When my husband Marcus died in a construction accident at age 33, leaving me with a 2-year-old son Derek and a fierce determination to never depend on anyone else for my family's security, I took that loan and built it into my first major contract within 6 months. I solved an inventory management crisis for a local electronics retailer that saved them $200,000 in the first year alone. Word spread through Portland's tight-knit business community about the young widow who seemed to have an almost supernatural ability to solve complex technology problems that other consultants couldn't even understand, let alone fix. What started as freelance troubleshooting for small businesses grew into a boutique consulting practice, which expanded into a full-service technology firm, which eventually became Sterling Digital Solutions, a company managing over $50 million in annual revenue by the time I turned. But I wasn't just building other companies' digital future, I was practicing exactly what I preached, building my own investment portfolio through decades of disciplined saving, aggressive stock market investments, real estate acquisitions, and the kind of compound growth that most people only read about in financial magazines. My first major breakthrough came in 1995 when I invested heavily in a small software startup that was developing something called e-commerce platforms for businesses that wanted to sell products online. Everyone thought I was crazy for putting $50,000 into such a risky venture. That risky venture turned out to be an early prototype of what would eventually become Shopify. When the company was acquired 5 years later, my initial $50,000 investment returned $1.2 million, which I immediately reinvested into emerging technology stocks, Portland real estate, and a diversified portfolio that would fund every major investment decision for the next 2 decades. By my 50th birthday, I owned my consulting firm outright, had a real estate portfolio worth $2.8 million, and was generating passive income that exceeded most people's annual salaries. But I didn't stop there. I continued to identify trends, invest strategically, and grow my wealth through careful analysis and patient long-term planning. Early investments in cloud computing companies multiplied 15-fold when remote work exploded. My Portland real estate holdings appreciated consistently as the city became a major tech hub. My bond portfolio provided steady income through every market downturn. By my 65th birthday, my personal net worth had reached $14 million. By my 68th birthday, it had grown to $21 million, not including my company's valuation, or the various investment trusts and financial vehicles I had established over the year. I owned my penthouse condominium in Portland's Pearl District outright, a $1.9 million property with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River 2000, and a rooftop terrace where I hosted business meetings that shaped some of Oregon's biggest technology deals. I also owned a coastal retreat in Cannon Beach, a $1.4 million oceanfront property with 150 feet of private shoreline, a custom-built cedar home with 4 bedrooms, and a workshop where I restored vintage motorcycles during my semi-retirement year. Most importantly, I had created multiple streams of completely passive income that generated approximately $72,000 per month, whether I worked or not. Dividends from my technology stock portfolio provided rental income from my commercial and residential properties generated $28,000 monthly. Bond interest and treasury payments added another $12,000 monthly, and my share of profits from various business partnerships and investment funds contributed an additional $9,000. This wasn't money I had to earn through active work anymore. This was money that flowed into my accounts automatically, month after month, year after year, whether I was sleeping, traveling, or foolishly helping ungrateful family members who had absolutely no idea how wealthy their benefactor actually was. What my son Derek and his wife Melissa would eventually discover was that a woman who had built a $21 million fortune from a $5,000 loan wasn't someone who could be easily manipulated, controlled, or taken advantage of, especially when it came to money. I had dealt with every type of financial predator, family manipulator, and wealth-seeking opportunist during my 4 decades in business. I knew the warning signs, I understood their tactics, and I had both the resources and the knowledge to protect myself when people I loved crossed the line from gratitude to exploitation. They were about to learn that freezing someone out of your life works both ways, and some people have a lot more power to make that freeze permanent than others. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. What made my eventual financial retaliation so devastatingly effective wasn't just the amount of money I controlled, it was the 4 decades of strategic thinking, relationship building, business acumen that had created an almost unbreakable network of financial influence throughout the Pacific Northwest. By the time Derek and Melissa decided to test my boundaries, they were essentially declaring war on someone who had spent her entire adult life learning how to win battles they didn't even know were being fought. My expertise in digital systems wasn't just theoretical, it was practical, hands-on knowledge that extended far beyond simple business consulting. I understood how modern banking systems worked, how credit reporting functioned, how automated payments were processed, and most importantly, how financial institutions made decisions about creditworthiness and account access. When you've spent 42 years helping businesses optimize their financial and operational systems, you develop a very clear understanding of how those same systems can be used defensively when necessary. The technology sector in Portland isn't just an industry, it's a tight-knit community where reputation and relationships determine who succeeds and who fails. Over 4 decades, I had built personal and professional relationships with executives, board members, and decision-makers at every major financial institution, technology company, and business services firm in Oregon and Washington. These weren't casual networking connections. These were deep, trust-based relationships built through successful collaborations, mutual respect, and proven results. When I helped First National Bank of Oregon implement their digital transformation strategy in 2018, saving them $3.2 million in operational costs, I wasn't just completing a consulting contract. I was building a relationship with their chief technology officer, their VP of operations, and their board of directors that would prove invaluable when I needed immediate action on financial matters. When I guided Pacific Coast Credit Union through their merger and systems integration, preventing what could have been a $10 million disaster, I wasn't just earning my consulting fee. I was establishing credibility with financial professionals who would remember my name when I needed urgent assistance. My client roster read like a who's who of Pacific Northwest business and finance. I had personally worked with the leadership teams at Nike's technology division, helping them streamline their global supply chain management systems. I had consulted for Intel's Portland facilities, optimizing their manufacturing data analytics platform. I had advised the Oregon State Treasury on their investment tracking and reporting systems. I had designed and implemented the digital infrastructure for 3 of Portland's largest commercial real estate firms. But perhaps most importantly for what was coming, I had spent 5 years as a pro bono advisor to the Oregon Department of Financial Regulation, helping them understand how modern banking technology could be used to both serve customers and protect them from financial exploitation. That work had given me unprecedented insight into banking regulations, consumer protection laws, and the specific procedures that financial institutions were required to follow when accounts were flagged for potential elder abuse or financial manipulation. The professional recognition I had earned wasn't just regional, it was national. I had been featured on the cover of Pacific Business Journal 3 times. I had been named one of the top 50 women in technology by the Portland Tech Association for 5 consecutive years. I had spoken at conferences in Seattle, San Francisco, Denver, and Chicago about digital transformation strategies. Harvard Business School had published a case study about Sterling Digital Solutions' innovative approach to small business technology consulting. This wasn't an elderly woman who had stumbled into wealth through luck or inheritance. This was a nationally recognized business leader who had built an empire through intelligence, hard work, and strategic thinking. Every dollar of my $21 million net worth had been earned through careful planning, smart investments, and the kind of business relationships that don't disappear just because you decide to semi-retire. My investment portfolio reflected the same strategic approach that had built my consulting business. I didn't just buy stocks and hope for the best. I researched companies, analyzed market trends, and invested based on fundamental business principles that I understood from decades of hands-on experience. When I invested early in cloud computing companies, it wasn't because some financial advisor recommended them. It was because I had spent years helping traditional businesses understand why cloud technology would revolutionize how they operated, and I knew which companies were positioned to dominate that transformation. My real estate investments followed the same pattern. I didn't buy properties because they seemed like good deals. I bought properties in areas where I knew technology companies were expanding, where I understood infrastructure development plans, and where my business relationships gave me insider knowledge about upcoming commercial development projects. Every piece of real estate in my portfolio had been selected based on information and insights that weren't available to typical investors. The passive income streams I had created weren't just financial assets, they were the result of systematic relationship building and strategic positioning that had taken decades to develop. The commercial properties I owned weren't just generating rental income. They housed businesses that I had helped establish and grow, creating tenant relationships that were based on mutual success rather than just landlord-tenant transactions. The investment partnerships I participated in weren't just financial arrangements. They were collaborations with business leaders who respected my judgment and sought my input on major decisions. Most people who achieve significant wealth do so in one or two areas. Maybe they're successful in business, or they're good at investing, or they inherit money and learn to manage it well. What made my situation unique was that I had succeeded across multiple domains simultaneously. I was a successful entrepreneur, a skilled investor, a respected consultant, a savvy real estate developer, and a connected community leader all at the same time. This combination of skills, relationships, and resources created a level of financial power that went far beyond simply having money in bank accounts. When you've spent 40 years helping businesses solve their most complex problems, you develop a very clear understanding of how to solve your own problems efficiently and decisively. When you've built relationships with decision makers across multiple industries, you can make things happen with a level of speed and authority that most people can't imagine. But perhaps the most important asset I had accumulated over 4 decades wasn't money or relationships or business knowledge, it was perspective. I had seen how quickly financial situations could change, how dangerous it could be to depend on other people's goodwill, and how important it was to maintain control over your own resources and decision-making authority. I had watched successful businesses fail because they gave up too much control to partners who didn't share their values. I had seen wealthy families destroy themselves through entitlement and exploitation. I understood the difference between helping people and enabling. I knew the warning signs of financial manipulation. I recognized the tactics that people used to gain control over other people's resources, and most importantly, I knew how to protect myself when people I cared about crossed the line from gratitude to exploitation. What Derek and Melissa would eventually learn was that they hadn't just been taking advantage of a generous mother and grandmother. They had been systematically exploiting a business leader who understood exactly how their manipulation worked, who had the resources and relationships to stop it immediately, and who possessed the strategic thinking skills to ensure that the consequences of their behavior would be both swift and comprehensive. The woman they thought they were controlling was actually a woman who had spent her entire career learning how to win battles against people who underestimated her capability. They were about to receive a very expensive education in exactly how dangerous it could be to mistake someone's generosity for weakness. Derek had always been what child development experts diplomatically call creatively inconsistent, a polite way of describing a child who could generate brilliant ideas, but completely lacked the follow-through to turn those ideas into reality. As a young boy, he was charming, intelligent, and bursting with entrepreneurial energy that manifested in elaborate schemes that invariably collapsed the moment they required sustained effort or genuine commitment. In elementary school, Derek would spend weeks planning ambitious neighborhood ventures that captured everyone's imagination. He organized elaborate treasure hunts that attracted dozens of kids, but fell apart when he lost interest in creating actual clues. He started a pet sitting service that generated enormous initial enthusiasm but ended abruptly when he realized that animals required daily care, even when he didn't feel like providing it. He launched a neighborhood newsletter that promised weekly editions but died after the first issue when he discovered that reporting actual news required research and deadlines. I supported these ventures enthusiastically because I believed that entrepreneurial thinking was valuable even when individual projects failed. Derek's creative energy reminded me of my own early business experiments, and I wanted to encourage his innovative instincts even when his execution was lacking. Looking back, I realized that my financial support for his childhood ventures may have taught him that enthusiasm was more important than results, and that abandoned projects didn't carry real consequences as long as someone else was willing to absorb the cost. During high school, Derek's pattern of passionate beginnings and disappointing endings intensified dramatically. He joined the debate team with dreams of becoming a lawyer, then quit after 2 months because he didn't enjoy the research required for competitive debate. He started a photography business with plans to save money for college, then abandoned it when he realized that successful photographers needed to work weekends and evenings. He signed up for advanced placement courses with intentions of earning college credit, then dropped most of them when the workload became demanding. His bedroom became a museum of expensive equipment from abandoned hobby. Professional camera gear from his photography phase sat unused beside musical instruments from his brief interest in forming a band. Art supplies from his month-long painting obsession shared shelf space with computer programming books from his 2-week coding phase. Exercise equipment from his fitness entrepreneur period gathered dust next to business plan templates from his various startup attempts. I funded these explorations without hesitation because I believed that finding your passion required experimentation, and because I wanted Derek to have opportunities that I hadn't been able to afford during my own youth. I also funded them because I could easily afford the costs, and because seeing Derek excited about new possibilities brought me genuine joy, even when I suspected those possibilities wouldn't last long. When Derek enrolled at Portland State University, It was primarily because I insisted that college was non-negotiable and because I was covering all educational expenses without requiring him to contribute through work or loan. He started as a business major, switched to communications after one semester, experimented with computer science for a year, tried marketing for 6 months, and finally graduated after 5 years with a general studies degree that represented persistence more than passion. After graduation, Derek moved back into my Pearl District penthouse and spent 2 years exploring his options while working a series of entry-level positions that he abandoned whenever the work became routine or the expectations became clear. Customer service representative at a telecommunications company, quit after 3 months because dealing with frustrated customers was emotionally draining and didn't utilize his creative problem-solving skill. Sales associate at an electronics store, quit after 4 months because retail hours conflicted with his optimal productivity schedule. Administrative assistant at a law firm, quit after 2 months because legal work required excessive attention to detail that stifled his big-picture thinking. Each job loss was explained by external factors beyond Derek's control: supervisors who didn't appreciate innovative approach, company cultures that weren't compatible with entrepreneurial thinking, workplace environments that didn't support creative personality. I listened to these explanations with growing concern, but I continued to provide emotional and financial support because I believed Derek was simply a late bloomer who needed time and encouragement to find his professional niche. What I didn't recognize at the time was that my financial safety net was enabling Derek's pattern of avoiding difficulty rather than helping him develop resilience and persistence. When he quit jobs impulsively, he didn't face the natural consequences of unemployment because he had a comfortable bedroom in my luxury penthouse and maternal support that cushioned every failure. When his decisions created financial hardship, he didn't experience that hardship because I absorbed the costs and provided alternative solutions. I was unintentionally teaching Derek that consequences were optional, that persistence was unnecessary, and that someone else would always be available to solve problems that he created through poor planning or lack of commitment. Every time I rescued him from the results of his choices, I reinforced his belief that effort and accountability were less important than having access to external resources. When Derek met Melissa, at age 26, I was genuinely hopeful that a serious relationship might provide the external motivation and structure that he seemed incapable of creating for himself. Melissa was 24, had graduated from Portland State's nursing program with honors, and had been working at Oregon Health and Science University Hospital for 2 years. She seemed responsible, practical, and genuinely affectionate toward Derek, despite his inconsistent work history and limited financial prospects. Melissa came from a working-class family in Salem. Her father was a postal worker, her mother cleaned houses part-time, and Melissa had worked her way through nursing school with student loans, grants, and weekend jobs that taught her the value of sustained effort and financial discipline. She understood the relationship between work and reward in ways that Derek had never been forced to learn, and she seemed to appreciate the security and opportunities that my resources could provide without taking them for granted. During their dating period, Melissa appeared to have a stabilizing influence on Derek's decision-making and follow-through capabilities. She encouraged him to stay with his customer service job longer than usual, helped him create realistic budgets that accounted for his actual income rather than his aspirational earnings, and suggested practical compromises when his entrepreneurial dreams exceeded his current capabilities or resources. I was impressed by Melissa's positive influence and grateful that someone other than me was encouraging Derek toward responsibility and self-sufficiency. For the first time in years, Derek seemed to be developing consistent work habits and realistic expectations about professional advancement. He was showing up reliably, completing assigned tasks without complaint, and even expressing interest in long-term career planning that extended beyond his immediate comfort or convenience. When Derek and Melissa announced their engagement after 18 months of dating, I was delighted to welcome someone into our family who seemed to complement Derek's strengths while compensating for his weaknesses. Melissa's practical nature balanced Derek's creative tendency. Her work ethic provided a model for the kind of sustained effort that Derek had always struggled to maintain. Her financial responsibility offered hope that Derek might finally learn to live within his means and plan for the future rather than depending on external support to solve problems created by poor planning. I enthusiastically agreed to fund their wedding celebration, budgeting $42,000 for a ceremony and reception at the Portland Art Museum that would provide the elegant, sophisticated celebration that Melissa had dreamed of since childhood. The venue overlooked the South Park blocks with floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased downtown Portland's skyline. We hosted 180 guests, including my business associates, longtime family friends, and Melissa's extended family from throughout Oregon. Looking back now, I realized that funding their dream wedding established the first major precedent that would shape our family's financial dynamics for the next 3 years. Derek and Melissa learned that I was willing and able to provide substantial financial support for events and decisions that I hadn't participated in planning. They learned that expressing gratitude and appreciation was sufficient payment for significant expenses. Most importantly, they learned that my resources were available to enhance their lifestyle and opportunities without requiring them to sacrifice their own preferences or convenience. What I thought I was doing was investing in their happiness and demonstrating my excitement about welcoming Melissa into our family. What I was actually doing was teaching them that Victoria Sterling's money was a family resource that could be accessed through appreciation rather than earned through contribution. The foundation was being laid for a dynamic that would gradually transform my generous support into systematic exploitation. But at the time it felt like I was simply being a loving mother who was blessed with the resources to make her family's dreams possible. When Derek and Melissa began house hunting 6 months after their wedding, I offered to provide the down payment as a combination wedding and housewarming gift. They had found a beautiful 5-bedroom craftsman home in Beaverton, a suburb known for excellent schools and family-friendly neighborhood. The house was priced at $85,000, and they needed $97,000 for the down payment to secure favorable mortgage terms that would keep their monthly payments manageable on their combined income. Melissa was earning $72,000 annually as a cardiac care nurse at OHSU, and Derek had finally found stable employment as a project coordinator at a mid-sized marketing firm, earning $54,000 annually. Together, their $126,000 household income was sufficient to support a reasonable mortgage, utilities, and modest living expenses, especially with the significant boost that my down payment gift would provide by eliminating the need for private mortgage insurance and reducing their monthly obligation. The house itself was everything a young family could want. Hardwood floors throughout, a renovated kitchen with granite countertops, a master suite with walk-in closets, and a large backyard perfect for entertaining and future children. The neighborhood was safe, quiet, and populated with other young professionals who were building careers and starting families. Most importantly, the local schools were rated among the best in the Portland metro area, which would provide excellent educational opportunities when Derek and Melissa were ready to have children. I was thrilled to provide the down payment, because homeownership represented stability and financial responsibility in ways that Derek had never demonstrated before. Owning a home would require him to maintain steady employment, budget carefully for maintenance and repairs, and think long-term about financial planning rather than living paycheck to paycheck or depending on external support for major expenses. For the first year of homeownership, this arrangement worked beautifully for everyone involved. Derek became more consistent about his work performance when he had mortgage payments and property maintenance responsibilities that required reliable income. Melissa managed their household budget carefully, tracking expenses and ensuring that they lived within their means, while building a modest emergency fund for unexpected costs. I enjoyed being a generous mother-in-law who could provide opportunities and security that enhanced their quality of life without creating unhealthy dependency. They invited me for dinner regularly, included me in holiday celebrations, and seemed genuinely grateful for the financial foundation that had made their homeownership possible. Derek appeared to be maturing into the responsible adult I had always hoped he would become, and Melissa seemed to be the stabilizing influence that would help him achieve his potential. What I was witnessing, I believed, was the successful transition of my son from dependent young adult to financially independent family man. The house purchase seemed to represent a turning point where Derek would finally develop the work ethic and financial discipline that had eluded him throughout his 20s. Melissa's practical approach to money management suggested that they would build wealth gradually and responsibly without requiring ongoing support from me. When Melissa became pregnant with twins during their second year of marriage, I was overjoyed to learn that I would become a grandmother to two babies simultaneously. The pregnancy was unexpected but welcomed enthusiastically by both parents, and I immediately began planning how I could support them during this exciting but financially challenging transition. I was present for the ultrasound appointment when they learned they were having twins, a boy and a girl, and I watched Derek's face transform with wonder and pride as he saw his children on the monitor for the first time. In that moment, I saw the man I had always believed he could become: focused, responsible, and motivated by love for his family rather than just his own comfort and convenience. The twins, Emma and Nathan, were born healthy after a relatively smooth pregnancy, and I was in the delivery room when they took their first breaths. Holding my grandchildren for the first time, I felt a level of joy and purpose that I hadn't experienced since Derek was small. These beautiful babies represented the next generation of our family, and I was determined to ensure that they would have every advantage and opportunity that my resources could provide. Within days of their birth, I opened college savings accounts for both Emma and Nathan with initial deposits of $30. I had watched too many families struggle with educational costs to allow my grandchildren to face those limitations, and I wanted to ensure that their academic opportunities would be determined by their abilities and interests rather than by their parents' financial circumstance. The twins were extraordinary babies who brought immense happiness to our entire family. Emma was born 12 minutes before Nathan, and from the beginning, she displayed an alert curiosity about everything around her. She would study faces intently, track moving objects with focused attention, and seemed to absorb every sight and sound in her environment. Nathan was more relaxed and contemplative, content to observe his surroundings with calm interest while his sister explored more actively. As they grew from infants to toddlers, their individual personalities became more distinct and delightful. Emma was fearless and determined, the kind of child who would attempt to climb furniture, investigate every cabinet and drawer, and test every boundary with persistent creativity. Nathan was thoughtful and observant, preferring to watch Emma's experiments carefully before deciding whether to attempt them himself. I loved being an active grandmother and was deeply involved in their daily care during those precious early years. I babysat several evenings each week so Derek and Melissa could have time together or simply rest after long days of work and childcare. I attended every pediatric appointment, helped with feeding schedules and sleep routines, and spent countless hours reading stories, singing lullabies, and playing educational games that would stimulate their developing mind. When Melissa decided to reduce her nursing schedule from full-time to part-time after the twins' first birthday, I supported the decision both emotionally and practically. Caring for infant twins was exhausting under the best circumstances, and I understood her desire to focus more attention on motherhood during those crucial developmental years when children benefit most from consistent parental interaction and attention. The reduction in Melissa's income from $72,000 annually to approximately $38,000 for part-time work created some budgetary pressure on their household finances, but I was happy to provide assistance with additional expenses that arose from having twins. Childcare costs for the days when Melissa worked, medical expenses not fully covered by insurance, additional clothing and equipment, and the general increase in household costs that naturally accompanies expanding from 2 adults to a family of 4. During the twins' first year, I contributed approximately $18,000 to help cover these additional family expenses, and I considered it money well invested in ensuring that Emma and Nathan had everything they needed while allowing Melissa to focus on motherhood without the stress of financial hardship. These contributions felt natural and appropriate, exactly the kind of support that grandparents should provide when they have the resources to help their family thrive. During the toddler years, I continued to be actively involved and financially supportive in ways that brought me tremendous joy while making Derek and Melissa's lives easier. When the twins outgrew their cribs and needed toddler furniture, I purchased beautiful matching bedroom sets that would accommodate their growth through elementary school. When they needed car seats, strollers, high chairs, and the endless array of equipment that active toddlers require, I provided those items as gifts that I was delighted to give. When Emma showed early interest in music, I bought a child-sized piano and arranged for beginner lessons with a teacher who specialized in early childhood musical education. When Nathan demonstrated mechanical aptitude with building blocks and simple construction toys, I provided increasingly sophisticated building sets and educational materials that would encourage his engineering interests and spatial reasoning skill. I treasured watching them discover their individual personalities and talents, and I was grateful to have the financial resources to support their development in ways that their parents might not have been able to afford independently. Every purchase felt like an investment in their future happiness and success, and every smile or laugh that resulted from my gifts brought me more satisfaction than any business achievement ever had. What I didn't recognize during this period was that my generous support was gradually training Derek and Melissa to expect external funding for any expense that exceeded their basic budget. Instead of learning to prioritize spending, save for major purchases, and make difficult choices about discretionary expenses, they were unconsciously learning that Victoria will handle it was a viable financial strategy for anything beyond their essential needs. By the time Emma and Nathan turned 2, I was contributing approximately $30,000 annually to support various aspects of their family life, not just emergency expenses or special occasions, but regular ongoing costs that had somehow transitioned from Derek and Melissa's responsibility to mine. But I was happy to provide this support because I loved my family, because I could easily afford these contributions, and because I genuinely believed I was investing in the twins' development and their parents' success as a family unit. What I was actually doing was creating a dynamic where my financial support was becoming an expectation rather than a gift, and where Derek and Melissa were beginning to make lifestyle decisions based on what I could afford to contribute rather than what they could afford to maintain independently. The foundation was being established for a level of financial dependency that would eventually transform from gratitude into entitlement, but at the time it felt like nothing more than a loving grandmother helping her family build the kind of life that would benefit everyone involved. When Emma and Nathan turned 4 and it was time to consider kindergarten options, the conversation about their education became the first clear sign of the entitlement that would eventually characterize Derek and Melissa's approach to my financial support. The neighborhood public school was perfectly adequate, well-funded, experienced teachers, solid academic programs, and a diverse student body that would expose the twins to children from various backgrounds and economic circumstances. Beaverton Elementary was highly rated, had excellent facilities including a new STEM lab and updated playground equipment, and would provide a strong educational foundation at no cost to the family. The school's test scores consistently ranked in the top 20% statewide, the teacher-to-student ratios were reasonable, and the extracurricular programs included art, music, and athletics that would give Emma and Nathan opportunities to explore their interests. But Melissa had been researching private schools throughout the Portland area and had become convinced that Emma and Nathan needed a more enriched educational environment to reach their full potential. She had scheduled tours at several prestigious institutions and had developed strong opinions about the advantages of smaller class sizes, individualized attention, and specialized programs that weren't available in public education. Victoria, I've been visiting schools extensively, and I really think the twins would benefit tremendously from the kind of personalized instruction that only private education can provide. Melissa explained during one of our Sunday family dinners, her laptop open to a presentation she had clearly spent considerable time preparing. Westside Academy has only 12 children per kindergarten class with 2 certified teachers in each classroom, compared to 26 students per class at Beaverton Elementary. Westside Academy was indeed an excellent school with an outstanding academic reputation, beautiful facilities, and programs that emphasized both rigorous academics and character development. The campus featured state-of-the-art science laboratories, an impressive library, and athletic facilities that rivaled many high schools. The curriculum included foreign language instruction starting in kindergarten, advanced mathematics programs, and arts education that would provide Emma and Nathan with exposure to music, theater, and visual. It was also extraordinarily expensive, $12,000 per year per child, which meant $24,000 annually in tuition costs that Derek and Melissa couldn't afford on their current income, especially with Melissa still working only part-time to focus on the twins' early childhood development. Honestly, Mom, Derek added with enthusiasm that seemed genuine but felt rehearsed. We want Emma and Nathan to have every possible advantage we can give them. Education is the foundation for everything else they'll achieve in life, and we don't want them to be limited by our current financial situation when we have the opportunity to provide them with exceptional opportunity. The conversation had been carefully structured to position private school as a necessity rather than a luxury, and to frame my funding of that choice as an investment in the twins' future, rather than as covering an expense their parents had chosen but couldn't afford. They were presenting their decision as educational wisdom rather than financial overreach. We know the tuition represents a significant expense, Melissa continued with practiced reasonableness, but we thought maybe this could be an early Christmas and birthday gift for Emma and Nathan instead of buying them toys they'll outgrow quickly. We could invest in education that will benefit them for their entire lives, rather than spending money on temporary entertainment. The request was being presented as my idea rather than their demand, and as a substitution for other gifts rather than an additional expense. They had calculated exactly how to make the request seem both reasonable and beneficial while avoiding any acknowledgement that they were asking me to fund a $24,000 annual commitment that would continue for the next 13 years of the twins' education. I agreed to pay for private school tuition because I genuinely believed in the value of excellent education, because I wanted Emma and Nathan to have opportunities that would maximize their intellectual and social development, and because I could afford the expense without any financial hardship. But more importantly, I agreed because I trusted Derek and Melissa's judgment about what was best for their children, and I wanted to support their parenting decisions rather than create family conflict about educational choices. What I didn't realize at the time was that this decision established a crucial precedent, that my financial support would be available for any expense that Derek and Melissa deemed beneficial for their family, regardless of whether they could afford those expenses themselves, or had explored less costly alternatives that might achieve similar results. The private school tuition became the first major recurring expense that I was expected to handle without ongoing discussion, annual reconsideration, or evaluation of the family's changing financial circumstance. It was simply understood that Victoria would pay for Westside Academy, and that this expense would continue throughout the twins' educational careers, without regard to changes in Derek and Melissa's income or my willingness to continue funding their choices. 2 years after Emma and Nathan started at Westside Academy, Derek decided that his project coordinator position wasn't fulfilling his entrepreneurial potential and that he needed to transition to a career that would allow for unlimited income growth and creative autonomy. His chosen path was commercial real estate sales, which he was convinced would allow him to build a business rather than just work a job, and eventually achieve the financial success that had eluded him in previous employment. "Mom, I've been thinking seriously about this transition for months," Derek explained during one of our weekly coffee meetings at a downtown Portland cafe near my penthouse. "Project coordination is steady work, but it's never going to provide the kind of income that allows Melissa to stay home with the twins full-time or gives us the flexibility to really build wealth for our family's future." The decision to leave stable employment for commission-based real estate sales would have been risky under any circumstances, but it was particularly challenging given their financial obligations, including the private school tuition and Melissa's reduced income. Derek was earning $54,000 annually in his current position, which provided predictable income that covered their basic living expenses even though it didn't support the enhanced lifestyle they were maintaining with my subsidies. "I know there's some financial risk during the transition period," Derek continued with the kind of optimistic confidence that I recognized from his childhood ventures, "but I've been talking extensively with successful agents in the commercial sector. The income potential is really unlimited for someone willing to work hard and build lasting client relationships." What he didn't mention was that commercial real estate sales required substantial upfront investment in licensing, training, marketing materials, and living expenses during the initial period when new agents are building their client base and learning the complexities of commercial transactions. New agents typically earn very little during their first year, and many fail to achieve sustainable income levels even after several years in the business. "We were hoping you might be able to help us navigate the transition period," Melissa added with carefully practiced diplomacy, "just until Derek gets established and starts earning consistent commissions that exceed his current salary." The transition period they were requesting support for turned out to involve 18 months and approximately $52,000 in total costs. Commercial real estate licensing required extensive coursework and examination fees that cost. Professional wardrobe suitable for meeting with business clients and attending industry events cost. Marketing materials including business cards, brochures, website development, and advertising expenses total. Vehicle lease for a luxury sedan that would make an appropriate impression on potential commercial clients cost. Most significantly, they needed living expense support to replace Derek's project coordinator's salary during the months when his real estate income would be minimal or non-existent while he built his client base and learned the commercial market. It's really an investment in our family's future earning potential, Derek explained when I questioned the scope of the financial support they were requesting. Once I'm established in commercial real estate, I'll be earning significantly more than I ever could in corporate project management, and I'll be able to start paying you back while building genuine financial independence for our family. The payback promise was vague and open-ended, with no specific timeline, amount, or accountability measures discussed. The focus was entirely on the investment potential and the temporary nature of the support rather than on concrete plans for repayment or realistic projections of Derek's likely earnings in commercial real estate. I agreed to fund Derek's career transition because I believed in supporting family members who were trying to improve their financial situation, because I wanted him to find career satisfaction and professional success, and because I hoped that higher earnings would eventually reduce their dependence on my financial support and create genuine independence. What actually happened was that Derek's commercial real estate career generated minimal income, while requiring ongoing expenses for continuing education, professional development, marketing, and business networking. After 18 months, he was earning approximately $38,000 annually from real estate sales, less than his previous project coordinator's salary, and far less than the unlimited income potential he had projected. But instead of acknowledging that the career change had been financially unsuccessful or considering a return to more stable employment, Derek and Melissa reframed his modest earnings as building toward future success and continued to rely on my financial support to bridge the gap between their expenses and their actual household income. The career change had actually increased their dependence on my funding rather than reducing it, but it had been presented and accepted as a temporary investment in their family's financial independence. What I was learning without fully recognizing it at the time was that Derek and Melissa's relationship to my money was becoming less about gratitude and more about expectation, less about emergency assistance and more about lifestyle maintenance. As my financial contributions became more substantial and more regular, Derek and Melissa's lifestyle began to inflate dramatically beyond what their actual income could support. This happened gradually, and was always justified by the twins' developmental needs, Derek's business requirements, or Melissa's household management responsibility. Each escalation seemed reasonable in isolation, but collectively they represented a family living far beyond their means, while depending entirely on my subsidies to maintain their chosen standard of living. The twins' extracurricular activities multiplied and intensified far beyond what most families would consider normal or necessary. Emma's interest in music became piano lessons, plus violin instruction, plus children's choir, plus music theory class. Nathan's fascination with building things evolved into robotics classes, plus engineering camp, plus advanced mathematics tutoring, plus science Olympiad training. Each activity was presented as educational enrichment that would benefit the twins' intellectual development, but collectively they represented approximately $1,400 per month in fees, equipment, transportation, and competition costs. We want Emma and Nathan to have the opportunity to discover their true passions and develop their talents to the fullest extent possible, Melissa would explain whenever I questioned the proliferation of scheduled activity. So many successful adults trace their achievements back to childhood experiences that sparked their interests and taught them discipline. We don't want the twins to miss those formative opportunities because of financial limitations. Family vacations became annual expectations rather than special treats, and the destinations and expenses escalated dramatically each year. Disney World, when the twins were 6, cost $9,500 for flights, resort accommodation, park tickets, meals, and souvenirs. A Caribbean cruise when they were 7 cost $11,200 for the cruise itself, flights, shore excursions, and vacation wardrobes. A ski trip to Whistler when they were 8 cost $14,000 for travel, lodging, lift tickets, equipment rental, lessons, and meal. Each vacation was justified as family bonding time and creating memories that will last a lifetime, but they were also documented extensively on social media in ways that suggested Derek and Melissa were living a lifestyle far beyond their actual means. Melissa had started a family blog called The Sterling Adventures that chronicled their vacations, activities, and daily life with carefully curated photographs and aspirational content that portrayed them as a successful, affluent family. The blog generated no income but required ongoing investment in photography equipment, editing software, and promotional activities that were presented as building our family brand and documenting the twins' childhood for posterity. The blog also created pressure to maintain increasingly impressive content, which drove additional spending on experiences and activities that would photograph well and generate engagement from followers. Most concerning was the way these lifestyle choices were presented to me as decisions that had already been made, rather than options that were being considered for my input and approval. Vacation bookings, activity registrations, and equipment purchases would appear as accomplished facts, requiring my immediate payment, rather than as proposals for my consideration and decision. Victoria, I've registered Emma for the Advanced Violin Intensive at the Oregon Music Festival this summer. Melissa would announce during family dinners. The program fee is $3,200, and she'll need a better quality instrument for the advanced repertoire. The music director says she has exceptional potential, and this program could open doors for scholarships and conservatory admission later. Mom, I've put a deposit down on the Whistler ski condo for next winter, Derek would inform me during our coffee meetings. The rates increase significantly after April, so I wanted to secure our preferred dates early. The total cost will be about $13,000, but it's going to be such an incredible experience for the kids to learn skiing in world-class conditions. These announcements were structured to make refusal seem cruel or unreasonable. How could I deny Emma her musical potential? How could I disappoint the twins by canceling their ski vacation? How could I prioritize money over family experiences and children's developmental opportunities? But cumulatively, these decisions represented a lifestyle that required approximately $95,000 annually in expenses beyond what Derek and Melissa could afford on their actual income. Private school tuition, mortgage assistance when Derek's real estate commissions fell short, utility payments, insurance premiums, vehicle expenses, extracurricular activities, vacations, clothing, and household expenses that they couldn't support independently. By the time Emma and Nathan turned 9, I was essentially funding an upper-middle-class lifestyle for a family whose actual income was barely sufficient for basic middle-class living. They were residing in a beautiful home, taking expensive vacations, providing their children with premium educational and recreational opportunities, and maintaining the appearance of financial success while being completely dependent on my contributions to sustain their chosen standard of living. The most troubling aspect wasn't the amount of money I was contributing. I could easily afford these expenses without affecting my own financial security. The troubling aspect was the complete transformation in how these contributions were requested, received, and acknowledged. What had begun as grateful requests for assistance had evolved into matter-of-fact announcements about expenses that I was expected to handle without question or complaint. Derek and Melissa had stopped asking for help and started informing me about costs that required my attention. They had stopped expressing gratitude and started expressing expectations. They had stopped treating my contributions as generous gifts and started treating them as natural family resources that I was obligated to provide. Most significantly, they had stopped making any effort to live within their means, or to develop financial independence. Instead of viewing my support as temporary assistance that would help them build towards self-sufficiency, they had restructured their entire lifestyle around the assumption that Victoria's funding would be available indefinitely for any expense they deemed worthwhile for their family's benefit. Derek's real estate career had plateaued at approximately $38,000 annually, and instead of acknowledging that this income was insufficient to support their lifestyle or taking steps to increase his earnings, He had simply accepted that the gap would be filled by my contribution. Melissa had made no effort to return to full-time nursing, despite the twins being old enough for full-day school, and instead had embraced her role as a full-time household manager whose responsibilities apparently included identifying new ways to spend my money on family enhancement projects. The twins, now 9 years old, had absorbed their parents' attitudes about my role as family financier and had begun making requests, or rather announcements of need, without any sense that they were asking for significant favors or expressing appreciation for extraordinary generosity. "Grandma Victoria, I need new violin strings and a better bow for my recital next month," Emma would announce, not as a request but as a statement of fact that implied immediate action was required. "My teacher says the equipment I have isn't professional quality enough for the advanced pieces I'm performing, and everyone else in my master class has equipment that costs about. Grandma, my robotics team qualified for the national competition in Denver," Nathan would inform me with confident expectation that this news would result in immediate funding. "The trip costs $2,500 per participant, but my coach says this kind of experience is invaluable for college applications and future engineering opportunity." The twins had learned to justify their requests by referencing educational benefits, peer comparisons, or competitive advantages that made their demands seem reasonable and necessary rather than expressions of luxury preference. They had also learned to bypass their parents' authority by bringing requests directly to me, understanding that I was less likely to say no to them than their parents were, and that their parents were unlikely to contradict decisions I made about spending my own money. Derek and Melissa had created a family dynamic where my financial support was not generous assistance, but necessary intervention to prevent their children from experiencing economic disadvantage relative to their private school classmates and activity peers. They had established a lifestyle that required constant external funding while teaching their children that this arrangement was normal and appropriate rather than extraordinary and temporary. The stage was set for the next level of escalation that would push my tolerance beyond its breaking point. They had established a pattern of escalating demands, diminishing gratitude, and increasing entitlement that would eventually lead them to cross boundaries I didn't even know I had. But first, they would need to test exactly how far their advantage extended and how much control they had gained over my resources, my decisions, and my life. That test was coming sooner than any of us realized, and the results would surprise everyone involved, especially Derek and Melissa, who had seriously miscalculated the extent of their power and the limits of my patience. The transition from systematic financial exploitation to sophisticated psychological manipulation began with what Melissa called a family financial optimization summit. She had prepared detailed spreadsheets, printed articles about multi-generational wealth management strategies, and transformed their dining room into what resembled a corporate boardroom to discuss our family's financial future in a more strategic and comprehensive manner. "Victoria, we've been analyzing our current financial arrangements and we think there might be more efficient approaches that would benefit everyone involved," Melissa began, her laptop displaying a PowerPoint presentation that she had clearly invested considerable time creating. "Right now we're handling expenses somewhat randomly, and we believe there are optimization strategies that could provide better outcomes for the entire family unit." The presentation was impressive in its thoroughness and manipulative in its underlying implication. Melissa had calculated my annual contributions to their household, $95,000 in direct support, plus various gifts, emergency assistance, and special expenses, and had created projections showing how that money could be optimized through different financial structures, tax strategy, and formal arrangements that would provide greater efficiency and security for everyone. "For instance," she continued, clicking through professionally designed slides that looked like they belonged in a wealth management firm's client presentation, "instead of you paying individual expenses directly, we could establish family trust accounts that provide significant tax advantages while creating more structured approaches to educational funding, household support, and long-term wealth preservation." Derek joined the presentation with enthusiasm that seemed genuine but felt carefully rehearsed. "Mom, what Melissa has discovered is that we've been thinking too small about family financial planning. Instead of handling expenses year by year as they arise, we should be implementing long-term strategies that protect everyone's interests while maximizing the impact of your generosity." The optimization they were proposing involved consolidating many of my financial contributions into regular monthly transfers that would give them predictable access to funding while creating tax advantages that would primarily benefit their household rather than mine. The proposed structures would also reduce the administrative burden on me by eliminating the need for individual approvals and payments for various family expenses. We're not asking for more money, Melissa was careful to emphasize. We're asking for smarter money management that makes the same contributions work more effectively while providing better security and planning for Emma and Nathan's future needs. But buried within the details of their proposal were several concerning elements that would have transferred significant control over my financial decisions to their preferences and priorities. Joint accounts for family expenses that would give them direct access to funds without requiring my approval for each expenditure. Automatic transfers that would make their monthly budget independent of my ongoing willingness to provide support. Most troubling, financial arrangements that would make it legally and practically difficult for me to reduce or eliminate my contributions without causing immediate hardship for their household. This is really about creating financial security and stability for the twins, Derek explained with apparent sincerity. Right now, if something happened to you or if your financial situation changed unexpectedly, Emma and Nathan's education and opportunities would be at risk. These structures would protect their stability regardless of future circumstances that none of us can predict or control. They were presenting their proposal as protecting the twins from potential changes in my financial situation, but what they were actually requesting was protection from potential changes in my willingness to continue subsidizing their lifestyle indefinitely. The optimization would have converted my voluntary financial support into mandatory financial obligations that would be extremely difficult to modify or terminate. I agreed to review their proposals carefully because they seemed thoughtful and well-researched, and because I wanted to be open to suggestions that might genuinely benefit everyone involved. But I also insisted on having any proposed changes reviewed by my own financial advisors and estate planning attorneys before implementing them, which clearly disappointed Derek and Melissa despite their expressions of understanding. What I discovered during that professional review was that every optimization Melissa had suggested would have reduced my control over my own money while dramatically increasing their access to. The tax advantages were minimal for someone in my financial situation, but the convenience advantages for Derek and Melissa were substantial and would have been nearly impossible to reverse once implemented. My financial advisor, Patricia Williams, was diplomatically direct in her assessment. Victoria, these arrangements would essentially convert your voluntary financial support into mandatory financial obligation. Once these structures are in place, withdrawing your support would be legally complicated and would likely create significant hardship that could result in legal challenges from your family members. And what about the tax advantages they've calculated? I asked, wanting to understand every aspect of their proposal. The tax benefits are real but modest for someone with your income level and asset diversification, Patricia replied. The primary beneficiaries of these arrangements would be Derek and Melissa, who would gain access to predictable monthly income, without the uncertainty of requesting your approval for each expense or justifying their spending decision. I declined to implement their financial optimization plan, explaining that I preferred to maintain flexibility in my financial arrangements and that I wasn't comfortable with the level of ongoing obligation their proposals would have created. Derek and Melissa accepted my decision with what appeared to be gracious understanding, but I later realized that my refusal to formalize their access to my money prompted them to pursue alternative strategies for securing and expanding their financial dependence on me. When direct financial negotiation didn't achieve the level of access and control they wanted, Derek and Melissa shifted to sophisticated emotional manipulation tactics designed to make me feel guilty for not providing more support and anxious about potentially losing access to my grandchildren. This campaign was subtle and was always presented as concern for family relationships rather than attempts to gain leverage over my financial decisions. The manipulation began with carefully crafted expressions of financial stress that were designed to make me worry about their well-being without explicitly asking for additional assistance. Victoria, I'm sure you've noticed that we've been eating at home more frequently lately, Melissa mentioned during one of our Sunday family dinners. We're trying to be more mindful about our budget now that the twins are getting older and their activity costs are increasing significantly. And we've been looking at more modest vacation options for this summer, Derek added thoughtfully. The kids have been asking about returning to Whistler, but we want to be responsible about our spending and realistic about what we can afford independently. These comments were carefully designed to suggest financial hardship without actually complaining or making direct requests for assistance. They wanted me to volunteer additional support rather than having to ask for it explicitly, which would have allowed them to maintain the appearance of financial independence while securing increased funding. When I didn't immediately offer to cover their unstated financial needs, the emotional pressure escalated to more direct manipulation tactics involving the twins themselves. "Mom, I'm concerned about Emma and Nathan," Derek said during one of our weekly coffee meetings. "They've been asking questions about why some of their classmates get to participate in activities that we can't afford, and it's difficult to explain financial limitations to children their age without making them feel different or disadvantaged. Honestly, Victoria," Melissa added with apparent reluctance, "we don't want them to feel like they're missing opportunities because of our current financial situation. Children shouldn't have to pay the price for their parents' limitations, especially when those limitations could be easily addressed." The implication was clear: I had the power to prevent my grandchildren from feeling deprived, and my failure to provide additional support was directly causing them emotional harm. They were positioning me as the person responsible for the twins' happiness and opportunities, rather than taking responsibility for living within their own means or making appropriate choices about discretionary spending. When gentle guilt didn't achieve the desired results, they escalated to more direct emotional coercion that involved using the twins as leverage in ways that were both heartbreaking and manipulative. "Grandma Victoria, why can't we take violin lessons during the summer?" Emma asked during one of our visits, clearly prompted by previous conversations with her parents. "Madison's family is sending her to music camp in Colorado, and her teacher says summer intensive programs are really important for serious musicians." "Grandma, everyone in my robotics club has the new programming software except me," Nathan mentioned casually. "Mom says it cost too much money, but it's only $400 and it would help me keep up with the other kids in my grade level." These conversations were devastating because the twins genuinely didn't understand the financial dynamics involved, but they were clearly being used as emotional weapons to pressure me into providing funding that their parents wanted but couldn't directly request. The most manipulative aspect was how Derek and Melissa would follow up on these interactions to reinforce the emotional pressure while maintaining plausible deniability about their orchestration. "Victoria, I hope you weren't upset by Emma's questions about summer music programs," Melissa would say afterward. "We try not to discuss financial limitations in front of the children, but sometimes they notice when their friends have opportunities that we can't provide. It's heartbreaking to watch them try to understand why their family can't afford things that seem normal to other kids in their social circle." They were creating a narrative where my financial support was not generous assistance, but necessary intervention to prevent my grandchildren from experiencing economic disadvantage and social exclusion. This emotional manipulation was particularly effective because it combined my love for Emma and Nathan with my desire to see them have opportunities and experiences that would enrich their development, while simultaneously ignoring the fact that Derek and Melissa had created their financial limitations through lifestyle choices that exceeded their income. As Derek and Melissa became more sophisticated in their financial dependence on me, they simultaneously began implementing a systematic campaign to limit my connections to outside perspectives that might help me recognize the manipulative dynamics they were creating. This isolation strategy was subtle and was always presented as concern for my well-being and age-appropriate lifestyle adjustments, rather than deliberate attempts to control my activities and relationships. My weekly bridge games with longtime friends became stressful and too demanding for someone my age. Melissa would observe with apparent concern, "Victoria, we've noticed you seem tired after your bridge night. Maybe it would be better to reduce those commitments and focus on activities that are more relaxing and less competitive. At your age, you shouldn't feel pressured to maintain such a demanding social schedule." My involvement in charitable board meetings was reframed as too much responsibility and potentially overwhelming given the complexity of modern nonprofit management. Derek would suggest with what seemed like caring advice, "Mom, you've contributed so much to these organizations over the years. Maybe it's time to step back and let younger people handle the administrative burdens while you enjoy a more peaceful retirement. My consulting work with former clients who still sought my technology expertise was portrayed as unnecessary stress that you should eliminate to fully enjoy retirement. Melissa would explain with apparent logic, "Victoria, you've already achieved everything you need to achieve professional. Why continue working when you could be spending quality time with family and pursuing activities that bring you joy rather than obligation?" Each of these suggestions seemed reasonable individually and was presented as loving family members wanting what was best for my health and happiness. But collectively they were systematically reducing my contact with people who knew me well, respected my expertise, and might have provided outside perspectives on the family dynamics that were developing around me. My longtime friend and bridge partner Catherine Morrison called one evening to express concern about my reduced social participation. "Victoria, I haven't seen you at bridge in 6 weeks, and you've missed the last 3 Charity Foundation meetings," she said with the directness that had characterized our 20-year friendship. "This doesn't seem like you at all. You've always been one of the most socially active and intellectually engaged people I know. Are you feeling well?" When I explained that I was spending more time with family and that Derek and Melissa were concerned about me overcommitting to social obligations that might be too taxing, Catherine's response was immediate and perceptive. "Victoria, that doesn't sound like the woman who built a multi-million-dollar business and managed complex client relationships well into her 60s. Are you sure your family's concerns are about your well-being? Or might they be about controlling your time and attention?" Her question planted a seed of awareness that would grow over the following months, but at the time I dismissed her concern as misunderstanding the natural evolution of family relationships and generational priority. What I didn't recognize was that Derek and Melissa were deliberately isolating me from people who might question their increasing control over my life and resources. The isolation campaign also included subtle discouragement of activities that brought me personal satisfaction but didn't directly benefit their family's needs or interests. My art collection, which I had been building for 15 years and which had become quite valuable both financially and personally, was suddenly too much to manage and a security risk in my penthouse. "Victoria, these pieces are worth substantial money and having them in a residential setting makes you a target for theft." Melissa would worry with apparent concern for my safety. "Maybe you should consider donating them to museums where they'd be properly secured and appreciated by the public. Plus the tax benefits would be significant, and you wouldn't have to worry about insurance and security anymore." My wine collection, which included vintage bottles that had appreciated significantly in value and provided me with a satisfying hobby of research and acquisition, was reframed as dangerous for someone your age to maintain. Derek would express concern. "Mom, navigating that wine cellar with all those stairs isn't safe. What if you fell and injured yourself when no one was around?" Maybe it's time to sell the collection and eliminate that risk while converting it to more liquid assets. My travel plans, which had always included international trips to visit technology conferences, art museums, and explore different cultures, were suddenly too strenuous and risky for someone your age. Melissa would fret with apparent maternal concern. "Victoria, international travel is so complicated now, and what if you had a medical emergency in a foreign country? Maybe it's safer to focus on domestic destinations that are closer to family support system." Each suggestion was framed as concern for my safety and well-being, but the cumulative effect was to discourage activities that gave me personal fulfillment and intellectual stimulation while redirecting my time, energy, and resources toward family-centered activities that served their interests rather than mine. Perhaps the most insidious aspect of Derek and Melissa's systematic takeover was the gradual erosion of my authority in financial decisions that involved my own money. This process began with requests for my input on family financial decisions, evolved into expectations that I would participate in their financial planning, and eventually became assumptions that their financial needs took priority over my personal preferences and goals. The twins' education provided the perfect vehicle for this authority transfer. When Emma and Nathan were in 3rd grade, Melissa decided that they needed additional academic support to maintain their competitive position at Westside Academy and ensure their preparation for eventual admission to prestigious university. "Victoria, we've been meeting extensively with the twins' teachers and educational consultants, and they've recommended supplemental tutoring in advanced mathematics, reading comprehension, and critical thinking skills. Melissa announced during one of our family dinners. The school has identified both children as gifted learners who would benefit from individualized instruction beyond what even excellent classroom teaching can provide. The tutoring program Melissa had selected cost $450 per week per child, $900 weekly or approximately $3,600 monthly during the school year. Over a full academic year, the cost would exceed $28,000, which was beyond what Derek and Melissa could afford but which they expected me to fund as an educational investment in the twins' intellectual development. We've already spoken with the tutoring center and scheduled comprehensive assessments for both children, Derek added with apparent efficiency. They have openings in their advanced program starting next week, but we need to confirm. The timing pressure was artificial. There was no legitimate reason why tutoring decisions needed to be made within days, but it was designed to prevent me from thoroughly researching the program, considering alternatives, or negotiating the scope and cost of the services. More importantly, Derek and Melissa had already made commitments and created expectations with the children without consulting me about funding, then presented those commitments as established facts that required my immediate financial support. Emma and Nathan are so excited about the program, Melissa continued with practiced enthusiasm. Emma especially is looking forward to advanced mathematics that will challenge her analytical thinking, and Nathan is thrilled about the creative problem-solving components. We told them they'd be starting next week, assuming you agreed that this investment in their education made sense. By involving the twins in their planning and creating excitement about the program before securing funding, they had made it emotionally difficult for me to decline or delay the expense. Saying no would mean disappointing my grandchildren and disrupting plans that had already been presented to them as confirmed arrangements. This pattern repeated across multiple decision areas with increasing frequency and sophistication. Family vacation plans would be researched, destinations selected, and reservations made before I was informed about the costs and asked to provide funding. Extracurricular activities would be chosen, schedules arranged, and equipment purchased before I was consulted about the expenses involved. We wanted to handle all the logistics and coordination so you wouldn't have to worry about the details, Derek would explain when I questioned this approach. We know how busy you are with your own activities, and we thought you'd prefer to just approve the overall plans rather than getting involved in all the scheduling and administrative work. But what was actually happening was that I was being systematically excluded from decision-making processes, while being expected to fund the results of those decisions. My role was being reduced to that of a funding source that provided money for choices made by other people, rather than a family member whose preferences and opinions were considered before financial commitments were made. The most concerning example occurred when Melissa decided that their house needed significant renovations to better accommodate our growing family's needs and provide appropriate space for the twins' developing interests and activity. The conversation that would shatter my tolerance forever happened on a brutally cold February evening when Portland was experiencing one of the worst ice storms in decades. The temperature had dropped to 18 degrees with wind chills reaching -25, and the city had issued emergency warnings for residents to stay indoors unless absolutely necessary. Power lines were down throughout the metro area, and emergency services were overwhelmed with weather-related incidents. I had been staying at Derek and Melissa's house for 4 days because my penthouse building was experiencing heating system failures due to the extreme weather, and they had insisted it would be safer and more comfortable for me to stay with them until the repairs were completed. What I didn't realize was that this temporary arrangement was actually a carefully orchestrated test to see how much control they could exert over my life and decisions when I was living under their roof and dependent on their hospitality. The evening started normally enough. We had finished dinner, Emma and Nathan were completing homework in their rooms, and I was reading in the living room while Derek and Melissa cleaned up in the kitchen. I could hear them talking quietly, but I wasn't paying attention to their conversation until their voices became more animated and I realized they were discussing me as if I were a problematic obligation rather than the person who had been funding their lifestyle for the past 3 years. She's being completely unreasonable about the estate planning and financial structures, Melissa was saying with obvious frustration. We've given her multiple opportunities to do what's best for the family, and she keeps refusing to consider arrangements that would benefit everyone involved, especially Emma and Nathan. I know, Derek replied, his voice carrying a tone of exasperation and entitlement that I had never heard him use when discussing me directly. Sometimes I think she's becoming selfish and controlling in her old age. She has more money than she could spend in 5 lifetimes, but she acts like helping her own family is some kind of burden or imposition. I felt my stomach clench as I realized they were discussing me as if I were an obstacle to their financial security, rather than the person who had been providing that security through my generosity for years. And the way she questions every expense and decision, Melissa continued with growing irritation. Like we're trying to take advantage of her instead of just providing normal opportunities and experiences for our children. Emma and Nathan deserve the same advantages as their classmates. And Victoria acts like we're being greedy for wanting the best possible life for our kids. Maybe we need to be more direct about our expectations, Derek suggested with a calculating tone that chilled me. She's going to leave us everything eventually anyway, so why is she making it so difficult to access resources that will ultimately benefit the family? We're not asking for anything unreasonable. The casual assumption that they would inherit my wealth, combined with their resentment of my reluctance to give them more control over my money, revealed attitudes and expectations that shocked me to my core. They weren't grateful for my support. They were frustrated by my resistance to their demands. I've been thinking, Melissa said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that forced me to strain to hear clearly. Maybe it's time to have a serious conversation about Victoria's living situation. This house is getting crowded with all of us here, and honestly, she's becoming more demanding and difficult to manage as she gets older. What do you mean? Derek asked with obvious interest. I mean, maybe it's time for her to consider assisted living or some kind of senior community where she'd have professional care, and we wouldn't have to worry about managing her needs on top of everything else we're dealing with. She's showing signs of cognitive decline, and her expectations about family financial support are becoming unrealistic and problematic. My blood turned to ice as I realized they were discussing moving me into institutional care, not because I needed it, but because my presence in their lives had become inconvenient, and my control over my own money had become an obstacle to their financial plan. She's still pretty independent, Derek said with apparent doubt about the feasibility of their scheme. For now, Melissa replied ominously, but she's definitely showing signs of age-related decline, and her attitudes about money management are becoming increasingly irrational. Maybe professional care would help her develop more appropriate perspectives about family financial responsibilities and intergenerational wealth sharing. They were planning to use fabricated health concerns to justify moving me into assisted living where I would presumably be easier to control and where they could potentially gain power of attorney over my financial affairs. They were discussing strategies for institutionalizing me so they could gain better access to my money. I sat in the living room, frozen with shock and betrayal, as I listened to my son and daughter-in-law discuss strategies for removing me from my independent life so they could gain control over my wealth. The people I had been supporting financially for years were planning to have me declared incompetent and institutionalized because I had refused to give them unlimited access to my resources. I confronted them immediately, walking into the kitchen with the calm determination that had served me well during 4 decades of business negotiations and difficult conversation. I heard your conversation, I said quietly, watching their faces turn white with panic as they realized their scheming had been discovered. I heard you discussing assisted living facilities and my cognitive decline and your frustrations with my financial boundaries and expectations. Derek and Melissa stood frozen, clearly scrambling to figure out how to respond to being caught planning my institutionalization for their financial benefit. Victoria, you misunderstood what we were discussing, Melissa began with artificially sweet desperation, her voice rising with panic. We were just talking about contingency planning in case your health needs change in the future. We want to be prepared to help you if circumstances require additional support. No, I replied with firm clarity. You were discussing how to get rid of me because my presence in your lives has become inconvenient, and because I'm not giving you the level of financial control you want. You were planning to have me institutionalized so you could gain access to my money without having to deal with my opinions or boundaries. Mom, that's not what we meant. Derek started with weak protest. Stop, I interrupted. I heard exactly what you said. You think I'm selfish for not giving you unlimited access to my money. You think I'm becoming difficult to manage because I won't agree to your estate planning scheme. You think I should be in professional care, so you don't have to deal with my expectations about being treated with respect and consideration. The silence in the kitchen was profound as they realized their true attitudes and intentions had been completely exposed. And you, I continued, looking directly at Melissa, you think I'm showing signs of cognitive decline because I won't submit to your financial manipulation. You think professional care would help me develop more appropriate perspectives about family financial support. You're planning to use my age as an excuse to gain control over my assets. Melissa's face was flushed with embarrassment and anger as she realized the extent of what I had overheard. Derek finally found his voice, but his response revealed even more about their entitled thinking. Mom, we're not scheming against you. We're trying to think about what's best for everyone involved, including you. Sometimes that requires difficult conversations about realistic planning for the future. Realistic planning, I repeated with bitter clarity. Is that what you call plotting to institutionalize me so you can gain control over my money? The pretense of family concern finally cracked, and Melissa's true feelings emerged with startling viciousness. You know what, Victorian, maybe it's time for complete honesty here, she said, her voice shaking with barely controlled rage. We have been thinking about everyone's needs, including yours. And your needs include having family members who care about you and are willing to manage the responsibilities that you're becoming less capable of handling yourself. Less capable? I asked with dangerous calm. Yes, less capable, she continued, her voice rising with each word. You're 68 years old, you live alone in a huge penthouse, you're isolated from appropriate social activities, and you're making financial decisions based on outdated ideas about money management and family obligation. Derek tried to interrupt with Melissa. Maybe we should. No, Derek, she snapped. Your mother needs to hear this. Victoria, we've been patient with your resistance to practical planning, but your stubbornness is creating problems for everyone. Emma and Nathan need stability and security. Derek and I need to plan for our family's future, and you need to accept that your role in this family is changing. My role is changing. Yes, your role is changing. You're becoming dependent on us for companionship, care, and practical support. We're the ones managing your social calendar, helping with your daily activities, and making sure you're not isolated or vulnerable. But instead of being grateful for our care and consideration, you're fighting us about financial arrangements that would benefit everyone involved. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Melissa was reframing her exploitation of my resources as care that I should be grateful for, and my resistance to their control as ungrateful stubbornness. And frankly, she continued with escalating hostility, your attitude about money is becoming problematic and selfish. You act like providing opportunities for your grandchildren and supporting your son's career development is some kind of imposition rather than a normal family responsibility. Family responsibility? Yes, family responsibility. When you have wealth and other family members need support, helping them isn't charity, it's obligation. Emma and Nathan didn't choose to have a grandmother with resources and parents with limited income. They shouldn't be penalized because you want to hoard money instead of using it to benefit the people you claim to love. Melissa had just articulated the entitlement philosophy that had been driving their behavior for the past 3 years. My wealth wasn't my property. It was a family resource that I was selfishly controlling instead of sharing appropriately with people who deserved access to it. So what exactly are you proposing? I asked with the kind of dangerous calm that had preceded some of my most decisive business decisions. Derek and Melissa exchanged glances before Melissa delivered the ultimatum that would change everything. We're proposing that you start acting like a responsible family member instead of a selfish old woman who cares more about controlling money than caring for people. The words hung in the air like a physical assault, and if I don't... Melissa's response was swift and brutal. Then maybe you should consider whether this family arrangement is working for anyone. Maybe you'd be happier living somewhere else where you can control your money and your decisions without having to consider how they affect other people. She was threatening to cut off my access to my grandchildren if I didn't submit to their financial control. Are you telling me to leave? I'm telling you to decide whether you want to be part of this family or apart from this family, Melissa said with cold finality, because right now your attitude is making it very difficult for everyone else. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. You're absolutely right, Melissa, I said with a calm that surprised even me. This arrangement isn't working for everyone, and I am going to decide whether I want to be part of this family dynamic or apart from it. I walked to the front door and put on my coat. Where are you going? Derek asked, suddenly alarmed by my decisive movement. I'm going outside to think about your ultimatum, I replied. I need some fresh air and space to consider my decision about whether I want to continue being part of a family that thinks I should be institutionalized for refusing to give up control of my money. Victoria, it's dangerous outside, Melissa protested with sudden concern that seemed more about appearances than genuine care. The temperature is below freezing and there's ice everywhere. Actually, I can make my own decisions about what's safe, I replied. That's one of the benefits of not being in assisted living yet. I opened the front door and stepped onto their icy porch, feeling the brutal cold hit my face like a physical blow. Victoria, come back inside, Derek called with panic replacing his earlier hostility. We can discuss this reasonably. No, I called back. Melissa just told me to decide whether I want to be part of this family or apart from it. I'm going to think about that decision. I stood on the porch in my coat, looking out at the frozen landscape and feeling the cold seep through my clothing, while behind me I could hear Derek and Melissa arguing in hushed voices about what to do now. After 10 minutes, I was genuinely cold and ready to go back inside to continue the conversation. I tried the front door handle. It was locked. I knocked on the door. Derek, the door is locked. No response. I knocked harder. Derek, Melissa, the door is locked. I could see them through the front window, standing in the hallway looking at me, but not moving toward the door. I knocked again, now genuinely alarmed by the cold and confused by their behavior. Let me in. It's freezing out here. Melissa appeared at the front door window and spoke through the glass with a cruelty that took my breath away. Maybe this will finally teach you not to interfere with our family decisions, she said, then walked away from the door, leaving me standing outside in life-threatening weather conditions. I stood there for a moment, stunned by the realization that my son and daughter-in-law had just locked me outside their house in potentially fatal weather because I had refused to submit to their financial ultimatum. Standing on that frozen porch, I experienced a moment of absolute clarity about my situation that cut through 3 years of gradual manipulation and systematic exploitation. Derek and Melissa had just demonstrated that they were willing to risk my life to maintain their control over my money. They thought that my love for my grandchildren and my desire to maintain family connections meant I would eventually submit to any treatment they chose to impose, rather than risk losing access to Emma and Nathan. Most critically, they thought that my wealth was effectively their wealth, and that my resistance to their control was temporary stubbornness that could be overcome through escalating pressure and intimidation. But they had made one critical miscalculation in their assessment of my vulnerability and dependence. They had assumed that a woman who had built a $21 million fortune from a $5,000 loan wouldn't use her financial power to protect herself from their exploitation. Standing on that porch, I decided to provide them with a comprehensive education about exactly how wrong they were. I walked to my car, which was parked in their driveway, and drove back to my penthouse, through the treacherous ice storm, taking what was probably the most dangerous drive of my life to escape people who had proven they were willing to risk my life for their financial advantage. The roads were nearly impassable, but I was determined to reach safety and begin implementing the consequences that Derek and Melissa had just earned through their unconscionable behavior. I spent the rest of that night in my warm penthouse, making a series of phone calls that would demonstrate to Derek and Melissa exactly how much power they had underestimated and exactly how expensive their mistreatment of me was about to become. Every call I made was calculated to systematically dismantle the financial safety net I had provided while documenting their abuse for legal protection. The first call was to my longtime friend and neighbor, Margaret Chen, who I contacted at 2:30 a.m. to request immediate assistance with witness documentation. "Margaret, I need you to help me document something crucial and I need you to do it tonight," I said, knowing she would understand the urgency in my voice despite the early hour. "Victoria, are you all right?" "It's nearly 3 a.m., Margaret responded with immediate concern. "My son and daughter-in-law just locked me outside their house in sub-zero weather because I refused to give them financial control over my assets. I need a witness to document my condition and state of mind before I take action to protect myself from further abuse." Margaret arrived within 45 minutes, along with her daughter Linda, who was a nurse practitioner and could provide medical documentation of my condition. "Victoria, you could have died out there," Linda said, as she examined the early signs of frostbite on my fingers and documented my core body temperature. "Exposure to those temperatures for extended periods can cause serious injury or death, especially for someone your age." "I know," I replied grimly, "and I need you both to document exactly what happened, and my current physical and mental condition so there's no question about my competency or my decision-making capacity." Margaret and Linda spent 3 hours with me, taking photographs of my minor frostbite injuries, recording detailed statements about the evening's events, and documenting my mental clarity and decision-making capacity. They also provided written statements about my physical condition and their professional opinions about the danger I had faced. "Victoria, what are you planning to do?" Margaret asked with concern about the systematic way I was documenting everything. "I'm planning to show Derek and Melissa what happens when you threaten someone who has actual financial power instead of the powerless elderly woman they think I am." The second call was to my attorney, James Patterson, who I also contacted in the early morning hour. "James, I need immediate legal action to protect myself from financial elder abuse, and I need it implemented before business hours tomorrow." "Victoria, what's happened?" James asked, immediately alert despite the hour. I explained the evening's events, the systematic financial exploitation, and the escalating control and manipulation I had been experiencing. "James, they locked me outside in life-threatening weather because I refused to give them control over my financial account. This has escalated from exploitation to physical endangerment." "Victoria, what you're describing constitutes elder abuse, financial exploitation and potentially criminal endangerment," James replied with professional gravity. "We need to document everything thoroughly and consider filing both civil and criminal charges. I want to file civil protective orders and obtain restraining orders immediately, but first I want to cut off their access to every penny of my financial support. I want every credit card, bank account, and automatic payment that they have access to frozen permanently. I can arrange for emergency court orders, but Victoria, you need to understand that this will create immediate financial hardship for their family, including your grandchildren." "James, they just demonstrated that they're willing to risk my life to maintain control over my money. Their children's comfort is no longer my primary concern." The third call was to my financial advisor, Robert Kim, who I contacted at 4. "Robert, I need emergency action on all accounts that have secondary access authorizations for my son and daughter-in-law. I want every card, account and automatic payment frozen immediately." "Victoria, what's happened?" Robert asked with professional concern. I explained the situation and my immediate need to cut off their access to my financial resources. "Robert, they have credit cards linked to my accounts, they have access to checking accounts for family expenses, and they have automatic payments set up for various services, including their mortgage, utilities and children's activities. I want all of it stopped immediately." "Victoria, I can implement emergency freezes, but this will affect their mortgage payments, utility bills, credit card payments, and any other services that are being paid through your accounts. Are you certain you want to proceed?" "That's exactly what I want. They just locked me outside in a blizzard because I wouldn't give them more control over my money. They're about to learn what happens when they lose the control they already have." The fourth call was to Patricia Williams, my wealth management specialist, who handled my more complex financial arrangement. "Patricia, I need you to terminate all financial authorizations, joint accounts and automatic transfers that involve my son Derek and his wife Melissa. Effective immediately. Victoria, this is highly unusual. What's prompted such drastic action? I explained the abuse and endangerment I had experienced. They've been systematically exploiting my generosity, and tonight they escalated to physical intimidation. I need every financial connection severed immediately. I understand. I'll prepare the necessary documentation and contact all relevant institutions. This will effectively end their access to approximately $95,000 annually in support, plus emergency funds and special expenses. Good. I want them to understand the true cost of their behavior. By 6 a.m. I had arranged for comprehensive legal protection and complete financial cutoff of Derek and Melissa's access to my resources. Emergency restraining orders would be served that morning, prohibiting them from contacting me or attempting to access my financial account. All credit cards linked to my accounts would be canceled immediately. All automatic payments for their household expenses would be stopped. All access to checking accounts and investment accounts would be revoked. Most importantly, all legal authorizations that gave them any role in my financial or medical affairs would be terminated. At 8 a.m., while Derek and Melissa were presumably getting Emma and Nathan ready for school and preparing for their normal day, my attorney was serving them with restraining orders and my financial advisors were systematically canceling every form of access they had to my money. I can only imagine their confusion when their morning coffee purchase was declined. I can only picture their panic when they tried to access the checking account for household expenses and discovered it had been frozen. I can only envision their desperation when they realized that every financial safety net I had provided for the past 3 years had been removed in a single morning with a series of phone calls made from my heated penthouse. By 9:30 a.m., my phone was ringing constantly with calls from Derek and Melissa that I declined to answer. By 10 a.m., they were calling from different phone numbers, presumably trying to reach me from the twins' phones or neighbors' phones. By noon, they were leaving increasingly frantic voicemails that documented their growing understanding of their financial situation. "Mom, there's been some kind of mistake with the credit cards," Derek's first message said with confusion rather than panic. "They're saying the accounts have been canceled, but that can't be right. Can you call the bank and straighten this out?" "Victoria, we're having problems with the checking account," Melissa's message said 20 minutes later, her voice beginning to show strain. "The bank says access has been revoked, but we have bills that need to be paid today. Can you call us back immediately?" "Mom, what's going on?" Michael's voice was rising with panic in his third message. "We can't access any of the accounts, the credit cards aren't working, and we have automatic payments that are going to bounce if this isn't fixed today." "Victoria, this is ridiculous." Rebecca's message was angry rather than concerned. "Whatever you think you're accomplishing, you're hurting Emma and Nathan more than you're hurting us. Their school payments, their activity fees, everything is connected to those accounts." By 2 p.m., the messages had become desperate and revealed exactly how completely dependent they had become on my financial support. "Mom, please call us back." Derek's voice was shaking with genuine fear. "The mortgage payment is due tomorrow, and we don't have access to the account. If this payment is late, it will affect our credit rating and could trigger foreclosure proceedings." "Victoria, you're being cruel and vindictive." Melissa's message was filled with barely controlled rage. "We had one argument, and you're punishing our entire family. This is elder abuse in reverse. You're using your money as a weapon against people who love you." "Mom, the twins are asking questions about why their activities are being canceled and why we can't pay for things we promised them," Derek pleaded in his afternoon message. "Whatever problem you have with Melissa and me, please don't take it out on Emma and Nathan. They don't understand what's happening." The final message, which arrived at 4 p.m., revealed the complete collapse of their financial security and their growing understanding that I was not going to reverse my decision. "Victoria," Melissa's voice was cold and threatening, "if you don't restore our access to those accounts immediately, we're going to have no choice but to pursue legal action for financial elder abuse. You can't use your money as a weapon against your own family." That evening, I received a visit from police officers who had been contacted by Derek and Melissa with claims that I was experiencing a mental health crisis and was making irrational decisions about my finances. "Ma'am, we received a report that you might be experiencing confusion or distress that's affecting your judgment about financial matters," the lead officer explained diplomatically. "Officer, I appreciate your concern, but I'm not experiencing any confusion or distress," I replied calmly. I made deliberate decisions to protect myself from financial exploitation and abuse. I showed him the documentation Margaret and Linda had prepared, the legal restraining orders that had been issued, and the medical records showing my minor frostbite injuries from being locked outside. "Ma'am, are you saying that your family members caused these injuries?" "I'm saying that my son and daughter-in-law locked me outside their house in sub-zero weather last night because I refused to give them control over my financial accounts. These injuries are the result of that treatment." The officer's expression changed dramatically as he realized he was investigating a case of elder abuse rather than responding to a mental health crisis. "Ma'am, would you like to file criminal charges for endangerment and elder abuse?" "I'm already pursuing civil remedies through my attorney, but yes, I think criminal charges are appropriate given the circumstances and the danger they put me in." Over the following days, as Derek and Melissa struggled to manage their financial obligations without access to my support, the full extent of their dependency became clear to everyone involved, including them. They couldn't make their mortgage payment and received a late payment notice within a week. They couldn't pay their utility bills and received disconnection warnings within 10 days. They couldn't fund the twins' private school tuition and received enrollment termination notices within 2 weeks. They couldn't pay for extracurricular activities, and Emma and Nathan were dropped from music lessons, robotics programs, and tutoring services. They couldn't maintain their vehicle payments and received repossession warnings. Most importantly, they couldn't sustain the lifestyle they had been living for the past 3 years and were forced to confront the reality of their actual income versus their chosen expenses. Derek was earning approximately $38,000 annually from his real estate career. Melissa was earning nothing, having embraced her role as a full-time household manager and family blogger. Their combined income of $38,000 was completely inadequate to support a mortgage, private school tuition, extracurricular activities, and the upper-middle-class lifestyle they had been maintaining with my subsidy. Without my contributions, they were facing immediate financial crisis that would require dramatic lifestyle changes, potential bankruptcy, and possibly losing their home. The twins, who had been accustomed to private school education, expensive activities, and unlimited access to technology and entertainment, were suddenly experiencing significant financial limitations that they had never encountered before. "Grandma Victoria, why can't we go to Westside Academy anymore?" Emma asked during a supervised phone call that was arranged through my attorney. "Mom says we have to go to public school because of money problems. And why did my robotics program get canceled?" Nathan added with confusion. "The instructor says our account is closed and we owe money for equipment." The children were experiencing the natural consequences of their parents' financial irresponsibility for the first time in their lives, and they were confused and upset by the sudden changes in their circumstance. The most revealing conversations came during the court-mandated mediation sessions that were arranged to address the restraining orders and elder abuse allegations. These sessions exposed the depth of Derek and Melissa's entitlement and their complete inability to understand how their behavior had led to these consequences. "Mom, you're destroying our family over one argument," Derek pleaded during our first mediation session, his voice carrying a desperation I had never heard before. "We said things we didn't mean in the heat of the moment, but you're punishing everyone for mistakes that we're willing to apologize for. This response is completely disproportionate to what happened." "This isn't about one argument, Derek," I replied with calm firmness. "This is about 3 years of systematic financial exploitation that escalated to the point where you locked me outside in life-threatening weather because I wouldn't submit to your control over my money." "But Mom, we need your help," he continued with increasing desperation. "We can't maintain our life without your support. The kids can't go to private school. We can't pay our mortgage. We're going to lose everything we've built together." "Derek, you should have considered those consequences before you decided to threaten and endanger me," I replied. "You built a lifestyle that depended entirely on my generosity, then used that dependency as leverage to try to control me. Those were your choices. And these are the natural results of those choices. Melissa was less apologetic and more focused on practical solutions that would restore their access to my money. Victoria, we understand that you're upset, but we need to find a way to move forward that protects everyone's interests, she said with the kind of calculated reasonableness that I now recognized as manipulation. The children shouldn't suffer because of adult conflicts that can be resolved through better communication. Melissa, the children are suffering because their parents chose to live beyond their means and depend on financial support that they then used as leverage to control and abuse the person providing it. I responded. You created this situation through your choices, not through any failure of communication. That's not what happened, she protested with rising indignation. We had disagreements about financial planning, but we never abused you. We were trying to help you make better decisions about family wealth management. You locked me outside in sub-zero weather because I refused to give you control over my bank accounts, I stated flatly. What would you call that? That was a moment of anger and poor judgment, not systematic abuse, Melissa replied with the kind of minimization that revealed her continued inability to understand the severity of her action. Melissa, that moment of anger and poor judgment was the culmination of 3 years of systematic financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and social isolation. I explained. You didn't suddenly become abusive that night. You revealed how abusive you had been all along. After 6 weeks of mediation, legal proceedings, and family crisis management, Derek and Melissa finally acknowledged the extent of their exploitation and expressed willingness to rebuild our relationship on completely different terms. But their acknowledgement came only after they had exhausted all other options and faced the reality of permanent financial independence. Victoria, we want to take responsibility for our behavior and find a way to repair our family relationships, Derek said during what would be our final mediation session. We understand now that we took advantage of your generosity and that we crossed boundaries that were completely unacceptable. And we want to apologize specifically for the night when we locked you out. Melissa added, though her apology seemed more strategic than sincere, that was dangerous and cruel, and we're grateful that you weren't seriously injured by our behavior. What are you proposing? I asked, knowing that any future relationship would need to be built on completely different foundations. We're proposing that we start over with clear boundaries and mutual respect, Derek explained. We want to rebuild our relationship based on appreciation rather than expectation. And we want to teach Emma and Nathan to understand and respect your generosity, rather than taking it for granted. And financially, Melissa took a deep breath before responding. We understand that your financial support is a gift, not an obligation. We want to develop independence from that support while rebuilding the trust and respect that would make any future assistance feel appropriate rather than coercive or manipulative. It means I'm returning to nursing full-time, Melissa said with what seemed like genuine determination. I've already applied for positions at OHSU and several other hospitals. We can't sustain our current lifestyle on one income, but we can live appropriately on 2 incomes without depending on your subsidies. And I'm expanding my real estate business with a more realistic and professional approach, Derek added. I've been treating it as a part-time hobby rather than a career, but we need steady income that we can depend on without external support. What about the twins' education and activities? They'll attend public school, which is actually excellent in our district, Melissa replied, and they'll participate in activities that we can afford rather than activities that require external funding. We've already enrolled them at Beaverton Elementary, and they're adjusting well to the change. And what about our relationship going forward? Derek looked directly at me with what seemed like genuine remorse. Mom, we want a relationship based on love and respect rather than financial arrangements. We want to spend time with you because we enjoy your company, not because we need your money. Victoria, Melissa added, we know it will take time to rebuild trust, but we're committed to proving that we can have healthy family relationships that don't involve financial exploitation or manipulation. I considered their proposals carefully before responding with the terms that would govern any future relationship. I'm willing to rebuild our relationship, but it will be on completely different terms, I said firmly. First, There will be no financial support of any kind until trust is rebuilt and sustained over time. You need to prove that you can live independently and treat me with respect without depending on my money. We understand, Derek said. Second, any future financial gifts will be my decision, made on my timeline, based on my assessment of your behavior and attitude. There will be no requests, no expectations, and no assumptions about my financial involvement in your lives. That's fair, Melissa agreed. Third, Emma and Nathan need to learn to interact with me as their grandmother rather than as a source of funding. They need to show genuine interest in my life, respect for my opinions, and appreciation for any gifts or opportunities I choose to provide. We'll work on that, Derek promised. Fourth, you will never again attempt to influence my financial decisions, estate planning, or professional relationships. My money is my business, and my choices about how to use it are not subject to family consultation or approval. Understood, they both said. And finally, if you ever again attempt to manipulate, threaten, or intimidate me in any way, this relationship will end permanently. I will not tolerate another episode like the night you locked me outside. Victoria, that will never happen again, Melissa said emphatically. I hope not, because next time there won't be mediation or reconciliation. There will simply be permanent consequences that you won't be able to apologize or negotiate your way out of. 6 months after that frozen February night, our family relationships had been completely restructured around mutual respect rather than financial dependency. Melissa had returned to full-time nursing and was earning Derek had doubled his real estate income by treating it as a serious career rather than a casual pursuit, earning approximately $71,000 annually. Together, their $49,000 household income was sufficient to support their mortgage, living expenses, and a modest but comfortable lifestyle. The twins had adjusted to public school remarkably well, and were discovering that they could excel academically and socially without expensive private education. Emma joined the school orchestra, which cost $100. Nathan participated in the robotics club, which was funded by the school district rather than requiring thousands of dollars in private fees. Most importantly, both children had learned to interact with me as a person rather than as a source of funding. They asked about my business activities, shared stories about their school experiences, and showed genuine interest in my opinions and preferences. Grandma Victoria, tell me about when you started your company, Emma said during one of our monthly dinners. Mom says you built it from almost nothing when you were young. Grandma, can you teach me about investing? Nathan asked. I want to understand how money works so I can be financially independent like you. These conversations were more meaningful and rewarding than any of the expensive activities I had previously funded, because they were based on genuine curiosity and respect rather than entitlement and expectation. Derek and Melissa had also learned to appreciate our relationship rather than taking it for granted. They invited me to family activities because they wanted my company, not because they needed my financial support. They asked for my advice because they valued my experience, not because they were trying to manipulate me into providing funding. 1 year after the night that changed everything, I reflected on the lessons that had emerged from our family crisis and recovery. The most important lesson was about the difference between generosity and enabling. For 3 years, I had believed that my financial support was helping Derek and Melissa build stability and success. What it was actually doing was preventing them from developing the skills, discipline, and independence they needed to support themselves and their family. By removing my financial safety net, I had forced them to confront their actual capabilities and resources, which turned out to be much greater than any of us had realized. Melissa was an excellent nurse who could earn substantial income when she chose to work. Derek was capable of real estate success when he treated it as a career rather than a hobby. The financial crisis I had created by withdrawing my support had actually benefited them by forcing them to develop genuine independence and self-reliance. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for people who are taking advantage of you is to stop enabling their exploitation and force them to develop the character and capabilities they need for genuine success and happiness. Today, our family relationships continue to evolve and improve, based on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. I occasionally provide gifts and opportunities, college savings contributions, special birthday presents, educational experiences. But these are surprises rather than expectations, and they're received with genuine appreciation rather than entitled assumption. Most importantly, I've maintained my independence, my social connections, and my control over my own life and resources. At 69, I'm more active, engaged, and satisfied with my relationships than I was during the period when I was being systematically exploited by people who claim to love me. If you're watching this story and recognizing similar patterns in your own family relationships, remember that you have more power than you might realize. Love doesn't require you to accept mistreatment. Generosity doesn't require you to enable irresponsibility. And sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let people feel the consequences of their actions, instead of protecting them from the results of their choices. The frozen bank accounts I created that February morning weren't punishment, they were education. And the education was worth every uncomfortable moment of the process that followed. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.